Hello, good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, September 10th. We are at 9:02 a.m. Roll call. Rick Bright.
Here.
Dennis Kuhn.
Here.
Fred Knapp.
Here.
Jeff Hamstra.
Here.
Ken Cawthorn. Thomas Hayes. Chair, we do have quorum. If we can start here and introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Sure, Rick Wilberg, Assistant Building Official, Pima County.
Robert Kunkel with KC Mechanical Engineering.
Christina and I am management assistant.
Dan,
Go ahead.
Dan Ice, Chief Building Official.
Clayton Trevelyan, City of Tucson Building Official.
Angie Reese, City of Tucson.
Dave Gibbons with Schneider Structural Engineers.
Thank you for being with us today.
Move to item number 2. International Building Code 2A. I know we have some handouts on our desk today. And it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, Clayton, but where you tag these are the provisions we discussed at our last.
Absolutely correct, sir. So in the handouts, we have the updates requested from the last meeting. We have not printed off copies of the codes that are still under discussion, such as the IRC and the IECC, but the IVC, IMC have been printed for essentially what may be the final version. And the tags on those are the changes requested from last meeting. So on the IVC tag, there was a request for language for retaining walls to be measured from the top of footing. Section 1610.1.1 that's been added. I believe there is another requested change that's not included.
Yes, this is Dan. Dave, I don't know if Brent talked to you about this, but he said in the new section 1609.6.1. Obviously the table's been removed from the IGC, so under item number 1 where it says wind uplift requirements shall be determined using the designed wind values we had of 110 miles per hour. Brent said what we need to do is the wind values from section 1609.6.11 plus 5 miles per hour. I mean, at 16.9. Oh, geez, I forgot what he said. But he's saying we need to get the wind values from our risk categories and add 5 miles per hour. Oh, that's what he's saying, 1609.1.
Yeah.
We discussed this last meeting. So what section needs to be revised here? It's the under 16, the new section 1609.6.1.1. Item number 1. The first sentence after wind values, we need to cross out of 110 miles per hour and replace from section 1609.1.1 plus 5 miles per hour. So for example, if you were in risk category 3, you would look at section 1609.1.1 where we have 110 miles per hour and we'd add 5 miles per hour, if I'm understanding.
Right. Well, let me ask this question. Why not just add 5 miles an hour to the 110?
Well, because it was risk category 5, it's 115 miles per hour. So
Okay.
if it was risk category 1, instead of 100, it'd be 105.
So we have multiple risk categories in Pima County.
Yeah, we have risk categories.
The risk category in this table, I believe, is referring to the building classification,
Yes.
not the region. So
Okay,
the type of building, right?
okay. All right, so we gotta refer back to 1609.1.1 plus 5 miles an hour.
Correct.
Everybody concur? Does anybody care? Sure.
This
Dale.
guy cares.
concur.
This guy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand it.
Okay. So the other change was 1610.11. That's it for the building code, correct? What is the mechanical code? We got 407.2, which is fixed occupancy.
That should be the first tag in your packet. This was an inconsistency between the city amendments and the county amendments that we've now clarified. So now both packages should be the same. And then the second tag is actually a new request forwarded by Mr. Cawthorn to remove group A1. Because essentially what we're saying is that the way the section of the code is worded, by removing using group A1 refrigerant, it allows all categories to meet that exception as long as their volume limits are below the table. So it essentially expands the use of that exception and also exempts the need for a shaft, assuming that your volume of refrigerant is below the limit specified in that exception.
Thomas Hayes joined the committee 910 for the record.
So it is the 1109.2.5 exception is part of the ongoing discussion that we've had about requiring a shaft for A2L refrigerants. And this proposed amendment reflects a code proposal going before the ICC committee action hearings in October. So this is a situation where the ASHRAE standards have been updated since the 2024 IMC was approved. And so we're now accommodating that update in ASHRAE into our amendments prior to it making it into the 27 IMC.
So we're gonna have to flag the whole issue is plus.
So there was an additional one that Ken had in his email about chapter 11, just refrigeration, about adding another section 2. I didn't see that reflected in this, but the reason for that is that you're exactly right, is that when they published the 2024 IMC, they used the information that was available from ASHRAE 15 at that particular time. The problem is that ASHRAE 15 is a living document and it is continually amended and being updated. Just in the past month, there's been 9 addendum to ASHRAE 34 and 1 addendum to ASHRAE 15 just in the 1 month's time. And so it is a moving target that is still being clarified because of A2Ls finally being able to be selected and kind of understanding what the parameters of them are, what the limitations of the different equipment is. So I believe the wording that he was looking at was, because it's a continuous maintenance process, was to, that you could utilize that standard in addition to what's written in this chapter, right? That does present possibly a concern for the code reviewers because they need to keep up to date with it as well. But that's kind of, short of continually amending the amendments and stuff like that. I don't know how we, like I said, kind of move forward. That's why he was looking to, probably insert that terminology so that it wouldn't have to be a formal amendment every single time. Sorry, a formal appeal every time. Sorry.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a question for the committee and staff because it's not fixed like other parts of the code. It's subject to change.
Correct. And the way.
Which I notice on the reviewers and the designers.
Correct. And so we've always been, aware of that and try to incorporate that into all of our designs. But, the code is the code, right? So once that's adopted, is you got to meet that and you have to kind of meet the best available standard of care that's, available at that particular time. So the problem right now is that the code now became higher than what ASHRAE 15. So ASHRAE 15, they were at the same, and now ASHRAE 15 is kind of clarifying these issues, saying, hey, no, there's exceptions and there's different, ways and processes you can do this. But now the code has said, nope, you will do all of these things, which is above and beyond kind of the standard of care, I guess you could call, because that's a continually evolving item, I guess, at this point. So it is difficult, and that's what we're trying to navigate through as well. So
What Ken's suggestion was that in chapter 11 under refrigeration, you had the following statement for information. ASHRAE standard 15-2022 is a reference standard and is regularly updated through continuous maintenance process and provides more up-to-date requirements for refrigerant safety. This standard can be utilized as an alternative to this chapter. Is what Ken had proposed.
correct.
So I guess my question to the staff is, are you gonna be able to keep up with this constantly evolving ASHRAE standard if that's the path we take?
This is Clayton with the City of Tucson. It is an ongoing challenge for staff to keep up with all of the codes that are constantly changing. So are we able to keep up? We do our best. As it relates specifically to Ken's suggestion for adding that language of the ASHRAE, we intentionally omitted that from your current package simply because that statement would belong in section 104 of the IMC for alternative methods and materials, but that section is deleted from the IMC because we use the chapter 1 administrative provisions of the IBC to regulate administrative functions of all the codes. So we are still in discussion. In fact, we had a meeting last week, our monthly regional building officials meeting, where we sit down and discuss with all of the jurisdictions how to, ongoing issues. And we're actually considering at a slightly higher level how to apply that alternative without the need for an appeal moving forward. So the difficulty with putting that exception in the amendments now, which we will get into on a later item, is these amendments won't be adopted for several more months. So they won't take effect before January. And so what we're looking to do is to provide an administrative approval to use those ASHRAE standards starting January 1st, before these amendments go to mayor and council. So the short of the story is, yes, we are acknowledging that Ken's suggestion is valid. We're looking at how to do that administratively, regionally.
Yeah, and under the current code as well.
Under the current,
Because
exactly.
as long as this takes, I mean, yeah, these are starting to now be available. Well, actually, so there's correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can't order A1s pretty much from most of the manufacturers anymore. So now it is fully transitioned to A2. So all new product that will be.
Yeah, we're kind of in this limbo of, is this unit available? Is that unit available?
Correct.
We're we're in that, and we're still struggling with, I don't know about you, but we're struggling still with engineering capacities and that type of information
Correct.
for designs moving forward. If you don't have that data, you're still speccing a system that is basically gonna be obsolete next year.
Correct, and that's, we were running the same problem. You couldn't even, up until about a week ago, you couldn't even get selections for the new equipment. It was unavailable. So you would basically just design around the best available information that you had, which was what was currently on market, and then have to, I guess, assume that over the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to be modifying designs and things like that for changes in, electrical demands, weights, capacities, all of the above, in addition to the fire, the potential, risk of it being an A2L now. In addition, so multiple items, yeah, so it's been difficult. So I think like you said, I think that's why he worded it the way he did, because I think chapter 11 already references ASHRAE 15 anyway, so that was kind of the thought, was to do that, but I don't know what the best vehicle to facilitate that is, and obviously we would defer to this group to figure out the best pathway forward for that. But it is still a moving target, and the dust may not settle on it for another 3 to 6 months to a year, possibly more. It's kind of hard to determine at this point.
I agree. Yeah, probably the next year, we're gonna be in a big time transition. So, it's hard to lock something in right now. That's why the ASHRAE standard is kind of my fallback to.
Agreed, and we do too. So it's
recognized as the industry standard.
Correct. It's the best available
Right.
information of like-minded people, basically to say this is the information, and code officials and codes, do what you will with this information. But at some point they have to hit print, and they do, and this is, the code was printed as it was, but that was the best information at that time. But it has already been amended and clarified, and exceptions and so on and so forth. So yeah.
So let me get some clarification on the schedule. This is not, codes aren't gonna be adopted January 1st because of the residential code tonight, correct?
Correct. So we have a future agenda item today to discuss schedule, but I can touch on that. So at the last meeting, we discussed potential adoption options of, maybe just amending the 2018 IMC Chapter 11 to accommodate the new refrigerants, because our current codes don't address the requirements that are being pushed down to manufacturers and installers. So we've gone through several options of what that would look like, how to either amend the 2018 before January 1st to acknowledge the new equipment and materials, to try and adopt the 24 before the end of the year, which doesn't necessarily make sense at this point because we've had such a delay in the energy code publication, or also potentially adopting some of the codes, but not all of the codes, which would cause greater confusion for everybody of which code, which are we using the 18 or we're using the 24. And the consensus thus far, although the decision hasn't officially been made, is to make an administrative authorization to use ASHRAE as an alternative currently, which would allow the flexibility for anybody that's using the new refrigerants to use a newer standard than the 2018, which would allow us to push the adoption out past January 1st. So we can have additional discussion when that agenda item comes up later today, as far as, whether that's more likely to occur effectively in March, or, at what time and how much time we may need to continue reviewing the energy code and the residential code.
If it's issued as an administrative item preemptively, does that continue on with the adoption of the new codes?
Yes, it would.
Okay, all right.
It's part of the advantage.
And I think that would satisfy our concerns and stuff like that. We just need to, we're concerned that it doesn't get omitted, right, fully, is because it is still vague and it's in its infancy, still being developed.
And,
So,
and what we're trying to avoid is designers needing an appeal
correct.
for every project they submit. And also accommodating the ability for anyone to start using that new equipment immediately. Right? And not wait for an agenda item that may get delayed
Yeah.
or continued. Like, how do we accommodate that
Yeah.
as soon as possible?
Correct. And Ken may have clarified that because since we did a 6-year adoption cycle, the 2018s don't even reference A2Ls at all. The 2021s did, but people weren't really using them yet. They knew they were kind of new to market and they were available, but there really wasn't any widespread adoption. Now it's forced adoption. So we're kind of, now in this situation where, like you said, because of our code cycle, we're at this limbo right now. So,
For the Fed's deadline is January first, right? Not moving that.
So,
It's a problem, okay?
Even if it moved, it's too late to move it because they discontinued old equipment and they're adapting. to
It's a
new.
mess.
We're at the point of no return here.
So it's literally stock on hand at this point, right? So if you have stock on hand, you can still do it. If not, you're pretty much getting new stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the code allows you to use alternative methods. You're just gonna codify the hash rate as an acceptable.
Correct, but the concern is that formal appeal process, right? Because that would be every single project with mechanical equipment would now require a formal appeal to do that unless an administrative action is taken, right?
Exactly.
I think the administration is the proper approach, in my opinion.
right, and we haven't fully vetted it, but I could see this as we come up with the language for this, and then it would be something that would be signed by all the local building officials, so that it wouldn't matter which jurisdiction you were.
In the Tucson region anyway.
Yeah.
Not doing the whole state.
Yeah, we don't know what other people are doing. That's, their thing, right? So,
So we don't know what Phoenix is doing.
But interestingly, I think this is part of what you were talking about. In the 2024, there's section 1101.1.1, which is refrigerants other than ammonia. Says refrigerant systems using a refrigerant other than ammonia shall comply with this chapter, ASHRAE 15,
mhm.
and the International Fire Code. So that may have been where Ken was possibly thinking about adding that. with
Yeah,
chapter 11.
yeah.
So you're proposing an amendment to the administrative code that would become effective January first.
Before then, like, we're looking at, October
Okay.
potentially,
Sooner
right?
rather than
Because the systems can be installed now.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
They're starting to show up on the shelves and.
so
Actually, the
we're trying to,
manufacturers are actually not releasing any of the older equipment, like Train. We had a big project, City of Tucson Public Safety Facility. They basically shut us down, Train had said, nope, we're not gonna release that equipment. You have to do the new equipment now. So we had to do all new
Yeah.
A2L.
When all of our projects, we kind of set a September 1st, better get a PO attached to it.
And order immediately.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
So-
so if I have to warehouse it, I have to warehouse.
Yeah, and I think it's a twofold because of the DOE rules, because I think it's not only one, can they produce it, but then per the DOE rules, it has to be installed prior to the next calendar year or whatever. So there was concern at that process as well. So it was not like the 22 shift that we had 10 years ago. It was, where, hey, there's infinite, or, a lot of stock on hand and these can be used indefinitely. It is not that, it is different. So there's kind of two things that are
Have you
going.
heard what the status of a possible
Extension of
ability
that.
for just a replacement on like a condensing on an apartment complex? That we still would get an R410A machine and it would
I
be
think
labeled
the-
as replacement only?
That's my understanding is
Yeah,
that's still
that's
gonna
still
be
the-
available, I think,
Okay.
yeah,
You
from
know,
what
I
we've been
haven't-
told, yes.
Oh, yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
I just was curious if there was any.
But it has to ship with, I think, no charge in it, and it has to be tagged for replacement only or something.
We
like
went
that.
through that,
Yeah.
when we went from 22 to 410A and they allowed units to be shipped dry
Yeah.
for a while and then they phased that out.
I think that's the discussion. And it's really a scheduling thing, which is further down. the agenda. So, does anybody have any other comments on the mechanical code amendments? Not hearing it, we'll move on to the plumbing code.
And just updated the reference of what Ken had discussed with IWC. It was for the hydromechanical section, he had added a table.
Yeah.
And so forth, but I'll let you.
Yeah, so to clarify is that the code allows two different ones, but kind of groups them into the same in the code, which is grease traps and grease interceptors. So additionally, there's a section in the code that talks about don't introduce clean water into a grease interceptor if you know, basically because you're gonna overburden the grease interceptor and its ability to actually filter out grease. Our contention, and I think the multiple manufacturers' contention is that that is an issue with grease traps, not with grease interceptors, because they have a kind of a finite flow range that is very limited, versus grease interceptors, which are not. So the language in that updated amendment was to reflect that basically, and IWC agrees with the wording of that, because basically if you're going to do a large enough grease interceptor, a small amount of clean waste from like an ice maker or a condensate drain is not enough to overburden the system and still allow it to do its job. It is so basically that was where that 50 GPM minimum requirement kind of came into play, where, you know, because now if you were introducing maybe a half a gallon a minute or a gallon a minute of clean water into that system, so that you can have all kitchen fixtures go to the grease interceptor and make sure nothing bypasses it. You know, there's no free lunch. You got to do one or the other. So, and that was our concern. So I think they agree with there was a back and forth between Ken and them. And I think the wording currently reflects that, which we find acceptable for sure. So, yeah.
This is Clayton. Is that true for both the Pima County and city amendments?
I'm not seeing the amendments in
The
this.
City of Tucson amendments were not printed again because we haven't made any changes. So they were printed last time and they're still available on the website. Apologies for not-
This would have been a change.
Yeah, I think
Ken just got approval last Thursday, I think. I made the changes yesterday. So it is referenced in the King County. The ones that I emailed on you.
Yeah, I don't know that it's been reflected yet
Okay.
in the cities.
I just want to make sure that we have the right language we'll get that new language inserted for next meeting.
Okay.
Kevin Quinlan, just a quick question. Is there any reference to retention time in regards to particularly the grease interceptor, 1 versus 2 minute, in terms of sizing for tying additional loads in, water loads to affect efficiency? We figure retention time.
So with grease traps, because they're rated that way in GPM and gallons per holding capacity, with the smaller interceptors, which are limited to like 4 fixtures and fewer, I think that was the wording. I don't know if it got into about so it still uses the straight PDI method for calculating fixture units and what type of grease interceptor is required. So that remains unchanged. I think it was just a question of you needed to provide at least a large enough size if you're going to have any amount of clean waste to incorporate all the kitchen fixtures going to it, which is, it's weird. There's 2 sections of codes that are contradictory, because from a local standpoint, they want all the kitchen fixtures to go to the grease interceptor to make sure that grease doesn't bypass that apparatus. But at the same time, how do you do that when you have fixtures in the kitchen that are just condensate or just draining, right? So that are clean waste. Hand sinks, for the most part, are clean waste, except for the couple times an hour that they're not.
Sure.
You know, things like that. So
I guess the basis of the question is, if we are going to tie in non-grease lines, is there any reference to the code to direct you? And right now, my understanding, either or in terms of sizing the grease interceptor, you can use a 1 or 2 minute retention time.
a 1 minute retention time is gonna give you a higher efficiency, increased removal rate. It's also gonna increase the volume of the interceptor. But if we are tying in additional, lines, it may point in a direction to size a grease interceptor with one, for instance, a 1 minute retention time. Might point more in that direction. That might resolve all of the code issues, as well as tying in additional lines that are not latent. I just was wondering if there's any connection between the retention time, sizing methods, and what this code is introducing.
I think it was more geared towards a gallons per minute, equivalent, rather than, so basically taking the amount of, taking the cumulative, all the fixtures that are connected, going back to, from fixture units to gallons per minute, and then making sure that the grease interceptor reflected that based on the retention time. So I think it basically does the same thing. It's just, yes, you are now accounting for potentially non-grease laden fixtures in that calculation. But not sure, I'd have to look at the,
Take it offline.
yeah,
I
so.
can get in more to the technical calculation that both are gonna be dependent on GPM, but
Yeah.
one is gonna yield a different result, different size. Anyways, I was just curious if there's any connection.
Okay.
There.
Yeah, and I think the other item was incorporating it for the alternate method of a brand that IWC has approved locally, and making sure that there's no, again, especially when we have third-party reviewers or second-party reviewers that are not the city and the county reviewing it. That's been a common comment that we've gotten back, is that, hey, the local amendments say you have to provide a concrete grease interceptor, but you're providing this. That doesn't jive. So then every time there's a, basically, no, this has been approved. Here's a letter from Industrial Waste saying that these are acceptable and things like that. So I think this amendment also encapsulates that item as well. So for alternate, methods.
Yeah, I believe I got this in there right. They added a new table, hydro mechanical grease interceptors meeting ASME A 112.14.3 shall be sized, and they added a table.
Correct. And we didn't want to put any brand reference or whatever, but that would be the correct standard. So if there are other manufacturers who ultimately start producing interceptors with that would, obviously, we'd need to make sure Industrial Waste finds those to be acceptable, but that would be the intent. Yes, correct.
For the record, clarify what code section.
It is the section. No, it's 1003.3, but then it's item B2. And then they added B2 and C, but on C, they added a second table, so there's two tables in C.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got the Tucson-Pima County and Industrial Waste all have to agree. And we're not quite there, right?
So I believe we have Industrial Waste's approval, and they offered it in an amendment wording that they found it to be acceptable. And I think Ken had relayed that to both the city and the county, correct? Right. So, okay.
Yeah, so I would say we are in agreement. We just haven't quite clarified the language, which is what I was aiming for, to make sure that we get the language consistent across both jurisdictions.
Yeah, doesn't matter what we approve if Industrial Waste doesn't want it.
Correct. And that's what we were getting differing opinions by people at Industrial Waste. So that's what we wanted to make sure to clarify. Yes.
So just so everybody's aware, Ken had spent quite a bit of time back and forth and talking with Steve King.
Great.
With Industrial Waste to come up with the current word, which in our amendments is printed in red.
So basically, everyone's agreed in principle, we just may have to clean up the language. But that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and the language I put in was language that Steve had agreed on.
Yep, we definitely need the extra eyes, so, Dan and I will, confer after today's meeting. And we'll make sure and get the city amendments updated now that we have that new language, and get that posted and sent out.
Okay. Another question, another section here, this requirement for waterless urinals.
It's a county resolution, that's all.
Okay. So supervisor said the question. but, Not everybody's on board with waterless.
Yeah, no, it was clear back to 2007 when water conservation resolution the county passed. Well, that's why it's in the county's amendments, but it's definitely not in the city's.
It's in the city. Waterless urinals.
Not as far as a mandatory.
Is it just the water sense table? Basically,
Correct.
like, okay.
Correct. So this falls under one of the few differences between the city and county amendments, which again reflects why we have to have two separate packages, because there are, ordinances adopted by each elected body that we individually have to meet. EV charging is an example of one that's on the city side, but not the county side yet.
So the mayor council's keen on water conservation, but they're not requiring waterless urinals.
So there's a number of discussions related to water conservation. And it just, that's one that has not been adopted as mandatory yet.
Okay. Do we know what the other jurisdictions are on waterless urinals or allowing?
Believe it's just, I don't know that there's any local waterless specific verbiage. It's more of just code standard at that particular time, what's written in the code. So I'm not even sure that they're adopting water sense at this point.
Well, the city has.
City has.
Right. The city has adopted a requirement for water sense fixtures in IPC, but that has not been adopted in the surrounding jurisdictions. Waterless urinals are acceptable in the city, but mandatory in the county.
But we did update this table this time to match.
Yeah, did it get updated to match the water sense for both?
I
city?
think, correct me if I'm wrong.
So like one,
I thought that's what we did with table 604 this time.
okay. So like, yeah, water closet should be 1.28 max now, I think, right?
Yes.
And okay,
That's what we.
okay, then yeah, that should be reflected. Previously it was 1.6.
Right.
They are trending downwards.
So that reflects the mandatory ordinance that was adopted by the city, and the county is acknowledging that it's a good ordinance, but it hasn't been adopted by board of supervisors,
No,
right?
no, it's
We're proposing
proposed.
it in
Proposed in
the amendments.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So we could say no. Right. For the county.
For the county.
But most people are going with water sense fixtures anyway, in my experience. That's not a big ask, I don't think.
I believe that was, you touch on one of the justifications brought up during the mayor and council hearing, that the availability and widespread use of water sense fixtures is not onerous to designer installers, since that's mostly what's being installed anyway. So we're really, stepping up the code to match common practice.
All right, anything else on the plumbing code? That's the electrical, we'll let Dennis talk more here. That's his area of expertise.
Well, it's actually pretty simple because we don't have too many amendments, and it appears that what's been published is what we've agreed to previously. So I really don't have any comments.
Anything else?
And just to reiterate that, agreed, no additional changes were made to the city amendments on the NEC other than what was already discussed last month and are already reflected in the county amendments.
24 international residential. I'm wondering, should that be on item 5, the scheduling? There's a lot of people just received the 24 IRC this morning. Obviously haven't had time to peruse this massive document.
So there was published amendment, city amendments, and I guess I'm sorry, Pima County amendment.
County amendments.
Yeah, they were just a draft I took off of electronic version.
And that was mainly to do administrative type things like the date changes and such.
Yes, yes. One thing, we did talk at last meeting on the wind speeds for table 301. We had thought maybe it should be 103. But I believe we've decided we should leave it at 105 to match risk category 2 in the IBC.
Yeah, I stay with 105.
Yeah, stay with
For the record, Ken Cawthorn joined the meeting at 9:43 a.m.
The budget makes
Yeah,
Not sequestered.
guilty.
So I don't, I'm not sure we're ready to discuss the 24 residential code. What the other board members think. As most of them discussed the 24 code this morning. Even thinking about it. I think you and I are on up the folks early. This morning. I just don't like to discuss it when people haven't even taken the wrapper off the book yet.
So the final two documents in the city packet handouts are the city adopted gray water ordinance, which is reflected in the 2018 amendments. Section P 2601.2.1 requires gray water segregation in new 1 and 2 family dwellings. So this needs to continue moving forward. Because this was modified after the 2018 code was adopted, it's currently a separate document. So I just wanted to make sure that the committee is aware that this amendment will be added to the package, but it's not new. So in the city amendments, you're going to see what's in the handout moving forward. There have been some discussions and or requests to consider revisiting how the gray water ordinance is applied. And there is some flexibility here. So as opposed to other ordinances, the specific language of the gray water ordinance is not in the adopted language from mayor and council. Mayor and council requires that gray water is segregated, but they don't necessarily say how. So there is a little bit of flexibility if we want to revisit the specific language of the gray water amendment. So I'm presenting that to you for your consideration now. Just keep in mind, we can't get rid of it without going back to mayor and council and requesting that they delete it.
This is Ken Coughlin. At curiosity, just has anybody ever put in the gray water system?
So
And got a code, and got a permit for it.
So a survey was distributed by Tucson Water a few years ago to that went out to homeowners of houses that have been built since the gray water ordinance was adopted. And they have some metrics as far as who is currently using their gray water systems, and it is fairly minimal for the quantity of houses that have been built with gray water segregated piping. However, that's also directly relative to the majority of the segregated gray water piping is subgrade, which means that the only way homeowners can use that gray water piping for irrigation is to install a reservoir and a pump and a filter, which would require a permit, which we haven't seen too many of. So to answer your question, we have not processed very many permits to install a pump and a reservoir and a filter to use that gray water. So one of the suggestions proposed to the city is that we revisit the requirement for subgrade gray water piping and potentially focus on above grade gray water piping, such as what can be obtained from stories above the first, so second, third stories for a gravity fed system and or laundry discharges that can exit the building before penetrating the slab.
I've done several gray water systems that were permitted through the city and county. And the difficulty is where you exit the building, you're so low, unless you're on a hill, you would have to pump it up in order for it to work. So they do work, but it depends a lot on the technology outside the building.
Well, that's the question is, we're requiring all this roughness for gray water, and the majority of it is not utilized. Correct.
Based on the survey information that we've had from Tucson Water, only a fraction of the number of houses that have segregated gray water piping are using the system to irrigate.
Well, then that makes sense to me to go with the second story requirement. Because it's hard to utilize it when it's coming out of the first floor. Not elaborate pumps, et cetera. So is that something the mayor and council would consider?
Certainly, if a recommendation comes from this committee on how to better use the gray water, since the city requires that gray water is segregated with the intent that it's irrigated, if it's not being used based on the current language, perhaps we can improve the current language to increase usage.
Well, I'd say there's more two-story houses being built than.
I don't have metrics to share on the volume or the ratio of 1 story and 2 stories.
It's smaller than the house to go up, right? So the two-story requirement might make some sense if we can come up with some footage.
And what fixtures would that capture?
Restrooms and or laundry.
It's a bathroom, lavatories.
Right.
Yeah, bathtub,
And-
lavatory, laundry, that's about it.
Does it capture the kitchen sink?
So
No.
typically, I've yet to see with kitchen sink on a second floor, but no, but typically no, because you have grease potentially going down the drain and food waste, things like that, so.
So the language in the current gray water amendments talks about bathing fixtures with drainage piping above grade plus all clothes washing machines. So there's already some language here related to upper story bathing fixtures and laundry fixtures. So like it's almost there. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think it just needs to exclude, I think the only benefit would really be to exclude the grade if there's no way to get fixtures on grade to the exterior. I mean, that is quite a bit of an added cost that the homeowners or home builders now have to do to get that piping out, stub out, everything else. So maybe we just recommend that we leave everything as is and just exclude fixtures on grade.
I think that could probably be accomplished if you look at the table. Table P2601.2, under the line 400 and greater, the first few words say at least 1 plus. That 1 is the first floor fixtures that are going below grade. So if that was your proposal, you might be able to just eliminate at least 1 plus and accomplish that.
And keynote D kind of alludes to it too, because where it says not on a common wall, things like that, but specific to clothes washing machines. Well, what if none of the fixtures are on an exterior wall? Then what, you know, so.
Make a motion there.
I would recommend a little bit further review and bring it back up for next month.
Okay, okay. Next one is the energy code.
One more note while we're on the IRC before we move on, please, Mr. Chair, is that the EV ordinance for residential is your last handout in the document. This is also a separate amendment that will be making its way into the new IRC amendment package. That doesn't mean it's new to this year. It just means that we're pulling all of these separate amendments that are located in separate sections into a single amendment package. I want to bring up that the 2024 IRC also has an appendix RE for EV charging. It might make sense to replace the language in that appendix with the adopted language from mayor and council. So different than the gray water ordinance, the language that you see before you hear for EV charging was specifically adopted by mayor and council. So we cannot change this language without a separate hearing before mayor and council. But we can replace the current appendix E with this language. So it essentially, it would be the best location to acknowledge that the IRC has an appendix for EV charging. We're just going to omit the ICC language and insert the City of Tucson mayor and council language.
Well, that's my stupid question. Why not adopt the IRC?
We have an ordinance.
So
Yeah,
it would have to go
I understand.
back in front of
But when
mayor
the
and council.
ordinance was written, there was no appendix in the IRC.
The difference would be which is more restrictive, which I believe the appendix in the IRC is more restrictive than the city adopted. So if we just adopt the appendix in the IRC, it has the potential to be more restrictive than the currently adopted language, which is certainly a recommendation that you can make to mayor and council.
Okay. I mean, just as a general rule, we tend to follow the national codes here. But that's probably something we need to review and decide. But I don't think mayor and council would object if we went to a more restrictive requirement. Unless it was too onerous.
I can't speak for mayor and council, but probably not.
I had thrown that as a possible appendix for the county.
To require, but you don't require EV charging.
So currently you said that was a amendment by mayor and council specific to the 2018 IRC though. So how does that automatically pass through to the 2024 though?
Yes, it does. Because it's a standalone ordinance with adopting language attached to that ordinance. We now have to put it into the IRC amendment package unless that specific ordinance is revised.
So we need to look at the appendix. With that against the mayor and council ordinance.
And your recommendations could go above and beyond the adopting ordinance, but it can't be less than.
Something to put on the agenda for- that's a chance to look at the appendix.
I would just note that I think in the development community, there's a lot of pushback to these requirements. And for us to go beyond the minimum level, I think we would get considered.
Well, that's why I'm suggesting we review the appendix and say what that does. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't either.
So look at that. And look at that judgment. Okay. Don't we have a accessibility requirement appendix in the IRC?
The accessibility document that I believe you're referring to is called the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance.
That's the city ordinance.
It's city and county.
County, okay.
And
Now an appendix of the IRC.
correct, it's a standalone ordinance also.
Okay.
But it also does not have specific language that modifies the IRC. It's completely standalone and essentially states that all 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings have to meet specific provisions of the A117 accessibility document, which effectively creates visitable or visibility, which is a term referred to one of the lowest levels of accessible criteria, which is mostly preparation, such as blocking in the walls for future installation of grab bars, 0-step entry, things like that. So an inclusive home design ordinance does not have IRC language. It adds A117 language to 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings. It is also of note that once you hit 4 family dwellings, the accessibility criteria then moves to the IBC. So there is a section in the IRC that says once you hit the fourth family, right, that it must comply with the IBC. Okay, and then we kick in to I believe it's chapter 11 of the IBC, and the next step of accessibility, and then you get into type B, type A, and accessible units, which are the 3 type of accessible units declared in the IBC. The 4th family unit in a single building is also consistent with HUD standards. So there's kind of where that trickles down.
Yeah, handicap accessibility and multifamily, I think. All the various regulations. Be nice to just. But that's probably another appendix we can look at compared to the. They're both the same, I think.
Yes, they're the same. County adopted it 2001 or 2, somewhere in there. City a couple years later.
Mhm.
And I have a whole shelf of handicap stuff. I like to put that down. Something reasonable. Item 4, vapor retarder.
So item 4 on the agenda, I can start to address. This was another item discussed with the regional building officials related to a requirement in the code that we are not seeing widely applied in the field. And just want to make sure that the committee has the opportunity to hear that there is the potential that this currently adopted code is not being utilized, which may be of concern, specifically related to vapor retarders not being installed underneath concrete slabs.
Yeah, that's a big item of discussion. Because when they went to the water-based adhesives for the flooring, that little bit of water migration was causing problems.
This is Fred Knapp. Also, when you have exposed concrete and you put vapor barriers underneath, you have issues. So, for quality control and insurance, we don't recommend vapor barriers underneath exposed concrete floors. Now, any flooring that has, to Rick's point, any flooring that has, any concrete that will have flooring, carpet, laminate, whatever, yes, we'll put vapor barrier underneath, but any concrete slab that does not have flooring, it causes issues. It causes cracking. It doesn't let the concrete dry properly, and then you just have issues in the future. So my recommendation is that we make that exception to, exposed concrete floors, don't require it. That would be my recommendation, just because 47 years in the business, I've seen it. Yeah.
If anybody's curious what that code section says in the county's IRC amendments, I actually put the code section on the very last page, how it's worded in 2024 IRC. I agree with you, Fred. We have done exposed concrete floors when I was in Colorado. Obviously, Colorado always used the vapor retarder, but it does.
Yeah.
And I would love to add on to that statement that concrete actually takes a lot longer to cure than the amount of time that it takes to finish the construction of the building. So that curing process is going to move moisture throughout the concrete. And if it can't go down into the soil because of a vapor barrier, it has to go up. But if the concrete is sealed, because it's an exposed concrete finish, then the vapor doesn't have anywhere to go. And therefore will create bubbling, cracking, and other issues. But it doesn't change the fact that when we have adhesive flooring and so forth, then that moisture is now impacting the adhesive if it's drawing from the ground. Because without the vapor barrier, then the concrete could still move moisture from the earth into the flooring. So very interested in any recommendations for a new amendment that might accommodate finished flooring.
I mean, the soil here is pretty dry. It almost seems to me with the vapor barrier, now you're driving the moisture up, you make that flooring even worse.
It just depends, certain areas of valley,
Right.
like out at Raytheon, there's so much groundwater underneath that site that they have to put a topical barrier on, you know, to minimize, make it 20 pounds, they can get up to 20 pounds, so encapsulate 20 pounds of pressure so that they can put flooring on top of it.
There is actually the argument that it's worse than dry climates too, because the concrete slab draws moisture to it. Just an example, you have a piece of plywood laying on the ground out in the desert in the middle of summer, you pick it up, it's normally moist underneath it.
Complicated issue.
Yes, it is. It's a very complicated.
I'm not against, this is Fred again, I'm not against the vapor barrier being under concrete that's going to have a finished flooring. Maybe some of the language is that you can't install flooring until you get the moisture content of the concrete down to a certain percentage, say 8 or 9%. You know, anything south of that, you can install adhesives and flooring on that concrete, but you get north of that, that's when you have the issues. So, and some of these projects are fast track too. You can't wait 27 days for that concrete to cure, to put the flooring down, and especially on existing floor slabs, because a lot of times all you're doing is pouring in plumbing trenches and stuff like that. And then you have, you're introducing more moisture to the subgrade, and you're introducing more moisture and having more areas where that water can or cannot escape. And so, yeah, there's issues there for sure.
Rick Wilbert, Pima County. So what do we do with garage conversions where they're gonna convert them into living space? Because we're not gonna have the barrier there, but it would be required.
This is Fred. In answer to your question, most garage slabs are depressed, and they come in and they pour a slab on top of that slab to level it out with the house. When they do that, you can introduce a vapor barrier on the slab.
This is Dan. This is more of a question for Fred and Tom. Obviously, typically right now, the night before you pour your slab, you guys do the termite tree, correct? So with vapor barrier, would you put vapor barrier down, then some DG, and then your reinforcement, and then?
Not necessarily. Sometimes you put the DG down, then the vapor barrier, there's a whole different school of thought for, does the DG go on top, does the DG go below? I recommend that the DG goes on the subgrade to get your compaction, then you put your vapor barrier down, then you pre-treat. And what that does, it will encapsulate that material, because we all know that the new pre-treat materials are heavily diluted from the old. So that way it doesn't leach down into the soil to a point where it's dissipated and you don't have effectiveness of your pre-treat. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we always recommend doing subgrade AB, then you put your vapor barrier down, then you're reinforcing and pre-treat it, and then you pour. And normally you have a little bit more latitude with when you're pre-treating on the vapor barrier than you do under the vapor barrier. The engineers will tell us, you know, you're gonna lose some of that, dissipate some of that material. So they'll say, if you don't, you're not pouring that day, if you get a rain delay, come back and pre-treat.
Okay. No, I was just curious.
Yeah.
I mean, in Colorado, we always put the vapor barrier on top of the subgrade and then enforcement, but we didn't have the termite issue
Yeah,
there, so.
yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And a lot of people, it depends on how they terminate that vapor barrier too. A lot of people just lay it on the ground, which doesn't do a whole lot of good. When you're gonna lay it on the ground, then you're gonna have maybe a corridor that's gonna be exposed concrete. And then you're gonna have classrooms, say, on both sides of that corridor. What you need to do is you need to bring that vapor barrier up and terminate it into a line of a wall. So that when you pour, you know, that's terminated. You know, that vapor barrier breaks that moisture from migrating over to the areas that don't have vapor.
In the 2024 IBC, unlike the IRC, there's an exception there. 1907.4, exception 3. Buildings of other occupancies where migration of moisture through the slab from below will not be detrimental to the intended occupancy of the building. But the IRC doesn't have that exception. Because maybe someone said residences do have a moisture concern. If it gets sucked up and then trapped, and then you could potentially have mold. So it's unlikely here. I think the difference is in the building code, you're gonna have registered engineers, architects, and on single family residence, you may not have a licensed professional. So you have to do a public service. Correct. So then is there an exception? It's
Would you provide the exception for
recommended
residential?
in the residential code for exposed.
Well, then who's gonna make that judgment call? Right?
Good point.
On commercial, you had somebody making the judgment call, residential, you may not.
No.
I don't know how many houses get built without a registration.
This is your chance to get in front of it, though. You can make the decision.
I got out of the residential business for a reason, so, yeah.
Hence why we put it on the agenda.
Yes, that's what the trial was about. I was at.
Oh,
Flooding though, but yeah,
Flooding.
it's residential
Yeah.
construction.
Well, this is vapor
Did it have a
retardant.
vapor barrier?
Well, this vapor retardant is gonna require some more research.
Sure.
Study before we. Because we're kind of unique. The rest, other parts of the country just routinely put down vapor barrier.
Yeah.
but We haven't this part of the country because it's so dry.
But I would add that Rick used to work in Vegas, and their climate's very similar to ours, and they always had to put it down.
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and some of that's because it's happened. I see some construction practices that do it only because that's the way it's done. Even though it doesn't make any sense in this particular application, so.
I will say the one that brought this to me originally was Brent. Because of what, now granted, his is mainly commercial, not residential, but he was the one that initially brought it to me, and then I took it to the building officials, our monthly building officials meeting. But it is something that's always been in the code and really never been addressed, other than just how we overlook by not just builders, but jurisdictions also. So,
Well, it's a hugely debated.
yeah, no, I'm not,
part of the country.
you said it right off the bat. It's a very complicated issue. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, something further research. I'm sure there's some industry standard recommendations.
But the city would be most interested in the committee's opinion on the matter so that we can help base our policy for inspectors and plan reviewers moving forward.
To that end, what are the problems that have come up from the non-enforcement? How often are we seeing those?
Well, evidently in commercial, it's seen quite a bit since they went to the new water-based adhesives. For example, these tile squares that are glued down, they can be a problem. It's my understanding. The vinyl floors, tile floor, maybe not so much. Traditional carpet in a home breathes, so I don't believe it has big of a problem with that.
But what about exposed concrete floors? So you have a problem?
Yeah, so if you retain that moisture as a slab,
After us?
and you don't allow it to wick out, you get checking on the surface. You get
That's
cracking.
assuming you've
Yeah,
sealed
you
the
get
top of the
spalling.
slab.
Yeah,
And
Well,
trap that moisture.
you can't seal the top of the slab right after you pour it. Concrete needs to cure.
No, but you still got moisture coming up from the slab.
That's what I'm saying. You still have moisture coming out from the slab. The idea is to contain that area as much as possible and allow it to wick out both ways on exposed concrete, and then isolate the areas with vapor barrier that receive a flooring, whatever type of flooring it may be. And that seems to, because, buildings, living and breathing, that seems to increase the longevity of the installation of the product and the
Yeah,
quality.
the sense I'm getting out of it is that, well, most conventional homes probably have the floor covering over exposed concrete. Not all homes do. My own home might have a lot of exposed concrete floors. No permanent floor coverings. They do have some throw rugs on. And I honestly don't know whether it got a vapor barrier or not. I think it did not. And should we require it always? Well, then you create that problem for someone that doesn't want to have a permanent floor covering on that floor. And but I could sell the house, a new buyer comes in, they decide they want to put the floor covering on it. So then, I don't think, at what point do you regulate this stuff or leave it,
This is
leave it
right.
unregulated?
At that point, you need to just bead blast the surface and put a topical vapor barrier on in order to put the floor covering. That's just part of the means and methods of, if you're putting a floor covering over an existing exposed slab.
If that's the case, then you might want to look at exception 3. Flat work patio is not likely to be enclosed.
Oh, no.
How do we determine what's likely to be closed and not enclosed? Maybe if it has a footing, it's likely to be enclosed, no footing.
Well, if it's exposed to the elements, to me, it's not exposed. I mean, you know what I'm saying? If it's a porch or a sidewalk or adjacent slab or even a concrete slab, even a garage slab.
But it says not likely to be enclosed. That would be kind of incumbent on code officials to determine what's likely to be.
And you've seen everything enclosed.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Well, over time.
Over
yes,
time,
Yes.
But driveways rarely are
Yeah.
enclosed. Walks,
But certainly
patios, yes.
covered patios all the time.
Yeah.
And it's in Arizona.
My feeling is that we live in an arid environment. I don't know that it would be wise to make it mandatory for a vapor barrier. We do a lot of projects where we'll do 4-inch aggregate base on top of a vapor barrier. Also in the county, you probably know there's a lot of cut and fill situations where if you have a hill right nearby, you can get flow underground there. And so I think it's more on the contractor to determine whether or not it needs to be done. And we've done floor covering that has come up because of moisture. And so that just goes to the registrar of contractors for the people that actually install the flooring and whether or not they follow the proper procedure.
Yeah, proper procedure to install the flooring is Fred again, is to take that test, you know, it's almost like a horizontal Ryland tube test, basically. And it's just a moisture test, and that'll determine, do I have excessive moisture to the point where I can't, the adhesive won't adhere. And that's the key. I mean, you have to leave that up to the industry folks to make that decision, I think, because if you mandate or make something mandatory, it's just gonna add layer after layer after layer of cost.
No, under,
Heartache.
But it is mandatory.
it is mandatory, right?
In the IRC, yes.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm here to request the other way, which is that maybe we should have amendment so that it isn't mandatory.
Well, that's the,
Or,
But you can't-
or more specifically, an amendment to identify when it's not mandatory.
But how do you determine that?
Why we're looking for your opinions and discussion. We appreciate your input.
In my experience, most commercial buildings get poured without a vapor barrier, and they don't have any problems. But once in a while, you will have a commercial building where moisture migration is an absolute nightmare. And it may be because it's next to a hill or some other condition. Most of the time, it's fine, but when you get moisture coming up through there, you're real fast.
I will say, from my perspective, my personal perspective for a moment, is that creating a situation that relies on the installer opens the potential for more variability of result. So my experience is the code is the starting point, and then you provide allowances for unique situations and considerations. So a possible exception that could be added as an amendment is where a soils test occurs and demonstrates that moisture is not an issue. That would be a potential amendment or exception that you could add as an amendment. Another possible exception is an allowance specifically for designs that include exposed concrete floors. Right? So what we would be doing then is providing exceptions that are very explicit to allow both the plan reviewers and the inspectors guidance, so that we're not relying on the installer, which can be extremely variable.
Well, problem with relying on the installer and the concrete is, but the vapor barrier creates problems for the installer and finishing the concrete slab, because it wants to curl at the edges and all sorts of stuff. So they're gonna take the one where they're not gonna get, think they're not gonna get a whole lot, which may not be the best decision. Why we get the big bucks. Okay.
Well, is there an exception that can mitigate the effects of placing on a vapor barrier? Rather than getting rid of the vapor barrier, are there practices?
So we'll do that, yeah,
that
that's part of the
mitigate
research. And the question is,
effect.
why do most buildings not have a problem, but every once in a while, you have a building that's a nightmare? And understanding why that is. To define some of the requirements. I don't know what the difference is. Fortunately, the one that had the problem wasn't my building, so I didn't get into the details. But this vapor retarder requires a lot more research and.
So we're saying
Vapor
omit
folks will
it,
tell you you
I'm
need it.
saying maybe always require it. but use its mitigating factors to install that slab.
Well,
I mean, I've seen them all cracked up, the new Rainbird facility. That slab curled all the
Yeah,
way.
and sometimes it's not about the vapor barrier. Sometimes, this is Fred, it's not about, sometimes it's a windy condition. Sometimes, you get back concrete from the plant and you don't really know it until it's placed and finished. Even though they pull the test, the cylinder test when you're pouring it. A lot of times you don't get those results until it's too late. And then you've poured 300 or 400 yards out of concrete already and you get curling and cracking and all sorts of stuff. You just need to tear it back out and pour it all. That's what we end up doing.
I mean, here in Arizona, it's dry, it's windy, which creates a lot of curing problems.
Yeah.
that you don't experience.
And to Tom's point, Clayton, this is Fred again, that you said we could do a moisture, a test on the subgrade, but there's a lot of runoff issues too from adjacent properties that come, that are integrated into the property that you're in, and you don't have control over that. Every day I'm mad because my neighbor is 2 feet higher than me and he irrigates his whole lawn and it comes through my patio wall and causes efflorescence all over my nice patio wall on my side, I'd love to just go cut his irrigation system out, but you can't do that,
I should offer to install a vapor barrier for them.
Okay, well, something for further discussion.
We skipped in. I wanted to just touch base, going back to the IECC and just point out one thing that I think if you haven't reviewed it yet, please review section 406, C406, which is the additional energy efficiency requirements. It's completely rewritten. It's much more involved. You need to get, depending on your building instruction and your region, which we're to be. So you have to do anywhere from 5 to 90 additional credits. And those credits are listed and they have point system. That's why the book is really so thick, because each of those credits are defined and what they are and how to get those. But it's going to take the whole design team to come up with, especially if you got to get 90 credits, it's going to take a lot of people. So.
Yeah. So it used to be as simple as you say, well, we're providing a high efficiency envelope or we're providing a high efficiency mechanical or electrical system or whatever, but it's not that anymore because I think doing one of those doesn't get you there. And so to Ken's point, I mean, our experience is that, the architects are concerned with their ComCheck compliance and things like that, electricals with theirs, mechanicals with theirs, but now there's going to have to be this symbiotic kind of relationship of all of them to figure out how that to document enough points.
On tables, how to get those points. So it goes on and on and on for 406. So it's a lot of effort. I don't know. I mean, it just is what it is.
Strike out entire section.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's more like a sort of.
It is exactly like the. Yes. So where if you do an energy model, you can avoid all that. So it might be that a lot of buildings, you're going to have to just do an energy model because trying to gather these points might be too cumbersome. So
And that's C, so that's only commercial, that's not residential.
correct. That's in commercial, right?
But residential also has mandatory points to achieve through essentially a menu of options. But that is also relative to the different compliance paths available to the design. So the prescriptive versus performance, for example, which is
There's 9 different optional paths in the IRC or in the residential sections you can choose. Prescriptive's pretty straightforward. It's what you do. But the other ones, you have to get certain points in order, if I remember correctly.
My big complaint is the inspection of what's required. Especially on apartments, because it's kind of in between. We did some buildings that were certified, so they had to have an independent inspector come in and they did the insulation. They did the duct pressure testing, floor door test. They did all that. And the first one was a complete total failure. I mean, we're talking 30% duct leakage for the first one. I mean, it was just a mess. never got inspected. After the first one, they all got on board. But that tells me that every other apartment, or maybe residential, even though we have all these requirements on the energy code, are maybe ineffective because the insulation is not done properly. You get a lot of duct loss. Oh, it doesn't know knows it's not gonna be pressure tested.
Residentially now it's required on all residents.
In the city,
City and in the code, yeah.
Yeah, it has to meet a minimum air, pressure standard. The only one I've ever failed is, and this happened to be final inspection. The plumber had run gas line and damaged our ductwork and completely knocked the collar out of the plenum.
that'll do it.
Leak just a tad.
Yeah, the best part was the third party was doing the testing said, Jeff, you never fail, but I think I found where it's at. And so we ended up having to cut a hole that the builder wasn't appreciative of to uncover, and guess who got to pay for repairs?
Plumber.
Yes.
Well, a lot of the energy efficiency happens during construction.
Right.
Or it doesn't happen.
Quite honestly, with the new energy code standards that are there, it's critical to us that are doing design work and doing the engineering, that their folks are doing those insulation checks, they're doing the window checks, that they indeed are putting in what you as the architect put on the plan rather than put the cheap stuff in.
Right.
So, it all comes apart if, those standards aren't met through the process. And Ken and I, if we ever have an issue with it, one of the things I can do very easily is I have found structures with uninsulated walls.
Yeah.
Because you have thermal cameras but then you're defending yourself that it wasn't done properly to begin with. Type of thing. So, it all goes hand in hand with these checks and balances of us following the code book, but also that it's getting executed that way.
It's an enforcement piece.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there are a lot of contractors out there that don't build exactly what's on the drawings. I mean, we hire a third party on every one of our projects for an enclosure specialist, and basically they validate everything that we do. And, because it saves us on the back end.
There's such a liability.
There's too much of a liability. And if something does go wrong, we can point the finger back at the architect. Great.
That's what I'm here for.
And quick question on performance versus, just sticking with the performance-based method out of IECC. Are there criteria, like, for instance, we do a lot of energy modeling, but are there criteria for the software that is run to produce energy models? 365, like the hash rate data, all that stuff that's similar to the lead.
Right, it's very
software
similar
requirements.
to lead. It's written kind of vaguely so that it opens it up to just about anybody's software. But I think it's gonna be more utilized in the 24 codes than it ever has been, because the people that were doing lead buildings were doing it because then they didn't have to run the comp check, so it saved a little bit of time. Now it's going to save a tremendous amount of effort because it's a conglomeration of, architect, mechanical, electrical, trying to gather these points and, to figure it out. It's just, like I said, same as lead, trying to get the next level up to, how do you get there?
I just in terms of the submission criteria, just want to make sure that, between the City of Tucson, the engineers that are producing the energy models, oversight,
Who's gonna review that?
who's going to review this and who's going to substantiate it.
Exactly.
Because there's a lot of, even down to the level of occupancy scheduling, there's a lot of energy that you can save just,
You can
there's just so
manipulate it
many
however you
little,
want.
yeah, exactly. So that comes down to like the minutia of the model itself. I'm just curious how those parameters are going to be reflected in.
Yeah,
review.
that's a very good question. So in LEED, they have usually the people that do the energy modeling also review other people's energy modeling. Where I don't know what's gonna happen with the city and county and other jurisdictions when you're gonna start saying, instead of the prescriptive or this method of going through all these tables and points, whatever, they're just gonna say, just do the energy model and send it through, because who is gonna review that?
But there's already a means to that, so how is that reviewed currently?
Right. So I think it just gets stamped and approved and moved on without a review. That's my guess.
I would beg to differ that things just get stamped and approved, but fortunately, the city does have a mechanical engineer on staff at this time. But the discussion could be broadened. We don't currently have a structural engineer on staff. So for the city, if a design submitted exceeds the capacity of our staff, we outsource. And that's typically what you'd see with other jurisdictions as well.
Yeah, okay. So I guess my main question is, I guess each software is going to have different parameters, it's gonna have different reports, it's going to show things differently. So it's like, how is your mechanical engineer going to differentiate between different software types, or will there only be certain softwares like we use Trace, 3D, 700, HAP? I'm sure you use similar stuff, but those are pretty, pretty standard, industry standard type energy modeling programs. Will there be some implementation, or does the city need some maybe guidance in terms of what are some of the more user-friendly or globally operated energy modeling software, so that performance data comes back and it can be easily interpolated or easily checked off? You know what I mean? Because it's just a lot of information, a lot of different parameters, a lot of different ways to show that information. So
I, for one, will be happy if that happens, because I see that collaboration between designers. That way, hopefully the drawings will be overlaid as well. And we won't have all of these big gaps and gray areas when we get drawings delivered to us when we're building facilities. That I just think it'll vet out a lot of issues. I think if there's that collaboration going on.
I mean, I think a lot of it still falls under section 103 in the code, where it basically says, the reviewer at any time can ask for additional data to back up what you're submitting, right? So, I mean, we've been asked for additional load calculations or something to, like we give a summary as per what's required for, our heat load calculations and stuff like that for sizing of equipment. Well, if there's a question, or, hey, can you provide additional data? Of course, sort of thing. And I think that, but I don't know that there's a, like, to your point, I don't know that there's a standard right now for what you're gonna submit. What sheets are you submitting? What detail level are you submitting? Is it a 100-page packet or is it a 10-page packet, right? So I don't know the answer to that.
C407 goes in the energy code goes into that. And CO, like 407.5 talks about the software tools and what
abilities it need to have.
Yeah, what the software needs to be able to do, and how that software then has to have approval from ASHRAE 140 and so on. And so they go through and if it doesn't have that approval, if it's not a certified software program, then there's a procedure you need to do to get to be able to use that.
Sure.
So I think it does talk about that, and that whole section of 407 does kind of go through all that.
Yeah.
But you are going to see that heavily leaned on.
Yeah, I think that's the first point. The second point is like, how is the city going to? Where I'm getting at is more the standard. Like the permitting process is difficult to begin with. You throw this on top of it, and it could create a lot more time and review or checking. Going back. This is if you're using a different software to spit out these results, how does the person check that for that? Just streamline it.
So there's probably gonna be from internally, there's probably gonna need to be some dialogue then of like, hey, the submission needs to include these basic elements. So like, for example, way back when, the residential. So they basically gave an example. Rich Franz did it. Yeah, exactly. It was like, okay, I'm looking for this and I'm looking for this and I'm looking for this, and this better be included in the submission. Otherwise it's coming right back, sort of.
That was
thing.
very helpful, actually.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So for the software submittal, it would basically be garbage in, garbage out, right? So you would just have to have
It
the
can be.
parameters
So
of what needs to be put in there.
any of these things can be, right? Structural calculations do the
Yeah.
same way, heating load calculations do be the same way, energy models are the same way. I mean, it's.
So if you could put in the minimums and you compare it to the minimums, I would think.
And not only that, that whatever you're saying in the model is reflected on the drawing.
Exactly.
You gotta correlate.
That's where I'm coming to. The next point is, you have an occupancy schedule in your energy model. How do you, I mean, there should be some kind of matchup between the energy model and the drawings. Identifying that, and maybe using the same symbology as the drawings, the software, just coming up with more of a standard based system where the permitting department can look at the drawings, look at the energy model, make sure they have everything they need in concise format, and be able to make sure that it jives with the set of drawings.
Well, the biggest gap of the energy modeling is determining how the building will actually be used. A lot of people have modeled it,
Occupancy is a big deal.
and then it didn't match the real world because it wasn't being used like it was modeled. I mean, there's a whole lot of variables in there that absolutely have a big impact.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Everybody puts a little refrigerator under their desk, that kind of impacts things.
And heaters, because it gets cold.
Okay. Can we talk about our future schedule now?
So this is Clayton. Just want to make sure that the committee is also aware of the implications of this continued discussion. I believe we've sent out appointment requests through March at this point, with the assumption that we may need to continue the discussions, but we can cancel the meetings as necessary if we finish early. So the current path is looking for a mayor and council public hearing or agenda item in the March timeframe. But we would still like to get the amendments wrapped up and finished, December, January timeframe to get us time to prepare to go before the elected bodies, and then get the county time to go before the Board of Supervisors. So assuming that the committee agrees, we'll continue with the path, produce a new adoption schedule based on a delayed adoption from our previous schedule, because what we stated previously is we would be going to mayor and council soon here in the next month or two with an adoption by the end of the year, but it doesn't look like we're going to make that.
So that gives us what, 3 meetings? So go to send it to mayor and council.
Correct.
October, November, December. You think that's sufficient? I'm concerned about this guy right here. May take a lot of discussion for the energy code.
But it's essentially those two, the IRC
Right.
and energy.
And then some Scrivener kind of stuff on the rest of the code stuff. But the energy code, big change.
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting, when projects get submitted, you're gonna get a lot of pushback. Why do I have to do that? Why are we doing this?
Okay, that all said, what's the alternative to it? though?
Well, true.
Yeah, given
Well, I think
the drive to go to nationally recognized codes.
well, I think that's kind of our mandate, but I think it behooves us to be familiar with this. So when the pushback comes, we that we have reviewed it.
Yet, doing work in other parts of the country, I noticed that many have local amendments that do delete this and that from the codes, delay adoption, those types of things.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Like,
Or the,
don't even adopt the energy code, right?
Yeah.
Some
Right.
jurisdictions, right?
At this political climate, we're gonna get away from
Right.
adopting the energy code. Kind of a big push for the city and the county.
I think it'd be helpful too to hear from both the city and the county how they do plan on, reviewing these submittals for the energy code, because they are going to be so involved, and it is so much more on to you to review, and you're trying to get them out in a week or 2 or 3. So yeah, I just, because that it impacts the construction industry, right? If all of a sudden now these things take so much longer to review.
Well, it's gonna take longer on the design end as well.
Right.
Meet those requirements, and then it's longer on the review time.
Right.
Unless the city and county are just gonna extend the stamps of calculations.
I'm sorry I'm ignorant because I haven't had a chance to review anything in that yet, but application to existing buildings and remodelings. How far do you have to go on, even on the present, is always a question. And many of the issues with getting quick reviews and quick construction and all do relate more to application to doing modifications of existing buildings. When you have a brand new building, typically you have more time. So maybe that's another thing we can look at, is how it's applied to existing conditions and how much you have to go back in and change something already built because you're now doing the new alteration.
So from what I saw, that didn't change a lot. So that is similar to the existing the 2018 IECC on existing buildings. And as long as you're not touching that, then so you're not touching the envelope, you don't need to change it. And it met code.
But on the electrical lighting side, we have to do an awful lot in existing buildings.
So you'll have to, yeah. And so there is a whole section, just like the other one, there's a section on existing buildings, but
Well, the problem with existing building is the documentation.
Or
So something
lack
will
of
be
same.
submitted that's missing some information, then the city or county approve it based on what's submitted, then when you get out there, critical piece of information wasn't included in the submittal. So a lot of it's in the preparation of the documents that get submitted. And I've run across some plans where, well, how come they didn't show this? This is kind of a critical piece of information. I'm sure you've run across that before too.
On a regular basis.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lack of information or a lack of accurate information provided at the time of plan review will equate to, who said it, garbage in, garbage out. And then I would also interject that the existing building code oftentimes prescribes which portions of the different codes apply, be it plumbing, mechanical, electrical, or energy, or accessibility.
And how many people actually use the existing building?
It's used quite a bit.
Is it?
Yep, it's used quite a bit.
I think we're seeing more and more people starting to use it too.
It makes sense.
And I'm actually involved in a ICC working group on how to improve the existing building code so that it can be used more, with the primary focus of converting empty office buildings to residential buildings.
Yeah, it's a pretty numerous document to go through.
I don't see where the existing buildings code gives the electrical side much relief on anything. I'm not sure how it is on mechanical and plumbing, but on the electrical side, yeah, it's an existing building, but it says everything shall be per the electrical.
Especially if there's a change of occupancy.
Yeah.
When there's a change of occupancy, then all of a sudden we have to meet the current criteria for electrical and new.
Yeah, but there are some exceptions to don't get on electrical.
I think you're just, we
Everything's,
don't have any leniency on the electric,
No,
right?
I'm not seeing it.
everything's a new building.
You're just lucky, Dennis.
There was something in the required calculations on some of these conversions. They said you have to calculate the service, but it doesn't say you have to calculate the feeders, but I was a little surprised to see that actually.
So we're meeting the second
So,
Tuesday, October, November.
question.
December?
Question to the committee, do you feel confident that we can complete the IRC and IECC reviews within the next 3 meetings?
Yeah, I do because I don't think we can do that much amendment.
Not unreasonable, but
Well, I mean,
kinda think
maybe
it's
we can
gonna
do a lot
wait
of
until
talking
January.
about it, and complaining about it, but in the end,
Right.
how much can we actually amend?
Right.
or the committee, we can amend anything.
You can make recommendations to it.
Right.
Right. Well, I mean, we pretty much agreed we're gonna follow what the national standard is, unless it's a local condition that requires a modification.
Local condition, the lack of design professionals, in particular in your division, that means that there just aren't enough people to get it done. Right?
Yeah, I mean, okay. So 3 months, that's completely undoable, but I tend to think it's gonna bleed into January.
We'll have a new proposed schedule for your review at the next meeting. And we'll forward these comments to our director.
And then I'll, next month. I thought we'd done that, so I actually got a vacation. So again, I won't be here next month, so.
And, I'm kind of throwing Rick under the bus, 'cause I won't be here in October for the meeting.
Oh, this record.
Yeah, this Rick, sorry.
No, he don't mind throwing all of it. You got his name Rick out under.
Rick W.
So, call to the audience.
There's nothing in the chat,
Nothing online.
nothing online. So just between us.
Is there anybody online?
Yeah. Yeah, there is. You're watching.
Okay. If nobody has anything to say, we'll adjourn this meeting. Second. So, motion and a second.
Who it was?
Thomas.
Who made the
is-
motion?
Thomas, motion, Fred second.
Adjourn.
Yeah.
We're adjourned.
We're adjourned.
Fred,
Did you catch that?
yeah, Fred was the second.
Second.
Where's close to the restroom?
Right over here.
Perfect.
To
Thank
the
you.
left.
Out the door.
We're talking about the,
Yes, so the thought is that